Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Interfaith Committee that has put this forum together to Making Justice Work Part 2, Police Practices. This is our second in a series of 2 forums, and it's been put together by several faith communities, including the All-Dulles Area Muslim Society, the Northern Virginia Hebrew Congregation, Restoration United Methodist Church, Martin Luther King Christian Church, St. John Neumann Catholic Church, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Reston, the United Christian Parish of Reston, and the Social Justice Committee of the Christ the Servant Lutheran Church. And we've done this because we're really excited about what we think is an opportunity to help promote justice in our country. We have a distinguished panel here today, and we're hoping for a lively discussion. But what we see is that there's a lot of momentum for change. There's a lot of realization that the program of mass incarceration that we've had for the last couple of decades has not necessarily made us much safer, and has devastated, has had tremendous cost, not only to budgets, but in the lives of individuals, their families, and whole communities. There's a recognition that, whether intentional or not, and in most cases probably not, there's a lot of racism in our justice system, and that needs to be worked on. There's a recognition that people coming out of prison need help to enter society and become productive citizens. So we think that there's a great opportunity here for change and for an improvement in our country. And here in Fairfax County, we've recently had the Board of Supervisors called together an ad hoc commission to study police practices, and they came up with a long report with lots of recommendations, lots of really well thought out and productive recommendations. And we want to talk about that today and how those recommendations are going to be implemented, and what we all can do to see that they are, and to help make a better society. With that, I would like to invite the pastor of our church, Joanne Bell Haynes, to come forward and welcome you to this church.
Good afternoon, God's beloved.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to United Christian Parish. We are certainly glad that you are here to address the need that our sisters and brothers have for us to hear them and to hear their cries and their needs. We are an ecumenical congregation. We are welcoming, open, and affirming, and we are comprised of 4 denominations. So if you look over to that wall, you'll see the 4 denominations that we represent. The Christian Church Disciples of Christ, the Presbyterian Church USA, the United Church of Christ, and the United Methodist Church. One congregation doing ministry in partnership with those 4 denominations. And we are a congregation who has this community at the heart of our ministry. And so we are really glad to have our panelists here, to have you here. And I invite us to give ourselves at this time to each other, that we might allow God's presence to be with us during this time. Holy God, we thank you for the gift of life and for your humanity that is made known in each of us. And we ask that you would bless us now, that we would be about the business that you have called us to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you. And so we pray that in all things that we will honor you, and that we will honor the divine image of you in each other. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. I am very aware today that we have lost many people over the last weeks and months to violence and to just all kinds of things. And so I do invite us to take a moment of silence to honor those who we have lost over the last months for many reasons. Amen.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Joanne. We are very fortunate to have scouts from 2 Boy Scout troops, Troop 157 from Herndon and Troop 786 from the Adams Society in Sterling. And we would like to invite them to bring the flag forward, and that will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
May the audience please rise and place your hand over your heart for the flag. Post.
Thank you very much. Before I introduce our moderator, I would just like to go over the program a little bit. Let me mention that with your programs, there were several additional handouts, ideas for future action, resources, and a criminal justice fact sheet. If you did not get those, there are extra copies outside when you leave. You're invited to pick them up. On your seat, you also found an evaluation form, and at the end of this, we'd really appreciate it if you would give us your feedback on the program and on what needs to be done next. The program, I will introduce the moderator, who will introduce the panelists, and then we'll make brief opening statements about the ad hoc commission's report and how their response to it and what is being done to carry out those recommendations. And then there will be some discussion between the moderator and the panelists, and then it will be followed by the best part of the day, which is your questions from the audience to the panelists. At the end, we've asked the panelists to make a few comments about what we all can do after this meeting, how we can get involved to try to make things better in Fairfax County. In talking to our moderator, John Lovis, I was delighted to find out that he and I had very similar careers and almost at the same time. We joined the Foreign Service just a year apart. We both served in Vietnam for our first tour, which gives you some idea of our age. And we both served in Central American countries, and John also served in Africa. After retiring in 1994, he and his wife settled in Reston, and John became very involved in just all kinds of civic activities. He's had leadership positions on the Civic Association, the Reston Association, the Lions, and other organizations. And he continued, and he's a journalist, he writes a column, he has a TV program, and he continues to be very actively involved. And I think best of all, he's the founder of the Lake Ann Farmers Market. It was founded in 1998, and it's the best market in all of Northern Virginia. With that, I'd like to turn it over to John and let him introduce the panelists. And I want to thank you all for being available today, and we're really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rob. One small correction, the Lake Ann Farmers Market is really called the Reston Farmers Market, the name of the whole thing. Thanks very much for that kind introduction. Welcome to you all this afternoon. We do indeed have a distinguished panel. Let me say a few things about them. You probably know these people pretty well, but let me just go over some of their background. First, we have Hunter Mill District Supervisor Cathy Hudgins. She was first elected in 1999, and she is serving in her 5th term in office. She chairs the Board of Supervisors Human Services and Housing and Community Development Committee, and is a member of the governing board of the Initiative to Prevent and End Homelessness. She also serves on the Virginia Association of Counties Education Steering Committee, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, and the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board. Prior to being elected to the Board of Supervisors, Ms. Hudgins was Chief of Staff to then Chairman of the Board, Kate Hanley. She's also been a math teacher, computer programmer, and analyst and consultant for AT&T. Ms. Hudgins holds a Master's in Public Administration from George Mason University and a BS in Math Education from the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. She received the Public Official of the Year Award in 2010 from the Virginia Transit Association as a regional champion and advocate for transit. Welcome, Ms. Hudgins. Seated down here a little closer to me, Fairfax County Sheriff Stacey Kincaid. Ms. Kincaid won a special election for sheriff in 2013 and was re-elected for a full term in 2015. As sheriff, she serves Fairfax County, the city of Fairfax, and the towns of Herndon and Vienna. Someday Reston, that was. The county sheriff administers the Adult Detention Center, or county jail, provides security to the county judicial and domestic and juvenile courts, the county judicial center and the domestic and juvenile courts, as well as formally serving court orders and documents. The sheriff has a staff of over 600, including 500 deputy sheriffs. Ms. Kincaid is a 28-year veteran of the sheriff's office, having begun as a sheriff's deputy right out of college and working her way up to the rank of captain before being elected sheriff. In 2008, she received the agency's highest honor, the Distinguished Service Award, recognizing her sustained exemplary performance. In 2014, Lawyers Weekly presented her with an Influential Woman of Virginia Award. Sheriff Kincaid received her bachelor's degree in political science, criminal justice from Frostburg State University, and is a graduate of the Leadership Fairfax program, a 10-month curriculum focused on community issues and designed to develop future enthusiastic leaders in the public and private sector. Sheriff Kincaid is implementing changes that focus on mental illness, which affect over 40% of county jail inmates. She's going to talk about that more later. Next, and welcome Sheriff Kincaid. Good to have you. And right next to me, not quite, you can't quite reach me, but he's pretty close, Fairfax County Chief of Police, Colonel Edwin Roessler, Jr. Lieutenant Colonel, now full Colonel Roessler, was appointed Chief of Fairfax County Police by the Board of Supervisors in March 2013. Established by the Board of Supervisors in 1940, the department supervised by Chief Roessler includes 1,400 uniformed officers and 360 civilians, the largest local force in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Chief Roessler is a 26-year veteran of law enforcement. He began his career with the New York City Department of Investigation before joining the Fairfax County Police Department as a patrol officer. He has served in every rank up to and including Deputy Chief, which he obtained in 2010. As Deputy Chief for Patrol, he managed crime-fighting efforts across all 8 district stations. Prior senior command positions also include the Internal Affairs Bureau, the Criminal Justice Academy, and managing the department's budget and human resources. Chief Roessler holds a bachelor's degree from Arizona State University, a master's degree from George Washington University. He also has graduated from professional development programs including the FBI's National Executive Institute, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point Leadership Program, and the Leadership Fairfax Program. Welcome, Chief. Good to see you. And down there on the far end is a former boss of mine. She's Mary Kimm, the editor and publisher of the Connection newspapers. The Connection newspapers are weekly newspapers serving 15 communities in Northern Virginia and Montgomery County, Maryland. Ms. Kimm has inspired excellence and change in media for more than 20 years. She's an award-winning journalist and opinion writer. She and her Connection newspapers team have won hundreds, literally hundreds, of press awards for investigative reporting, public service, editorial writing, publication design, news reporting, and more. Her editorials have been cited in local efforts to end homelessness and to increase transparency in government. Ms. Kimm recently served on the Fairfax County Ad Hoc Commission to review police practices, focusing her efforts on communications, the use of force, and independent civilian oversight subcommittees. She serves on the governing board of the Fairfax Falls Church Partnership to End and Prevent and End Homelessness, and on the board of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Washington Region. She also serves on the boards of Media Democracy Institute and various community organizations, including the Potomac, Maryland Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Kimm holds degrees in economics and political science from Swarthmore College. Next item on the agenda is panelist opening remarks. Try to keep them to 5 minutes if we can. And let's start with Supervisor Hudgins, if we could.
Thank you very much. I'm going to even be faster than that, too. I first of all want to say thank you very much to the coalition, to the community, United Christian Parish Church for hosting us, and say that I am so glad that we can come together and have a discussion of this nature in this community. I attended the first coalition meeting 2 weeks ago with Secretary Brian Moran, and we also in the community had the opportunity to hear over a couple of days from John Powell of the Haas Institute on racial justice and equality. And I think the conversation is a very important piece of building community in a way that we can do positive things. And I emphasize positive because we can have discussions. And the question is, how do we have these discussions to the point of actually accomplishing and moving forward? And that is really, really critical. I am here today to talk about the Police Practices Review Commission. And I think when we talk about discussions, I can actually make the relationship as to the role of that commission and the importance of the work that was done, but most importantly, the delay of getting there. And I think sometimes when you're absent discussions, you fail to have the oversight that's needed. You fail to have the involvement that's needed in the community to understand how policies are made, but most importantly, how you can be, as citizens, involved in that policy. So I'm sure we're all going to speak in terms of the recommendations that go forward, but the important part is how thoroughly we examine those recommendations, how we provide an opportunity to continue to have input to the Board of Supervisors, as well as the police department in making these decisions, and that we make certain that we don't fall back into the old environment. I have the recommendations. We had our first Public Safety Committee, which is a committee of the board. And the purpose of the board committees is to bring issues forward for the policy-making process. And unfortunately, the Public Safety Committee of January was the first public safety committee over a multitude of years. And to me, that is an indicator of the lack of direction that we have had in the oversight that the Board of Supervisors needs over the agency of the police department. And so when I looked at this chart and they brought it forward, I always say, I can almost tell when someone's ready to bring me to a daunting moment when they give me, I think this is about 20 pages, many lines, and the report is very good, but this report has to be brought to a point of policy discussions that can truly be examined and translated into actions that will have consistent oversight from this day forward. And that's what I'd like to talk about in this discussion, because it is really important that we not go back to where we were before. And before, when we had issues and they were police issues, we didn't bring them back for the board to say, where are we? And are there changes that need to be made? And I frankly believe that that is a partnership that's essential with the police department. And I will give you a simple example. I serve as chair of the Human Services and Housing Committees, and it is a calendar event that we must have at least 4 times during the course of the year to ensure that the policies in those 2 areas are being addressed in an appropriate way, and that as a county board and the agencies that are delivering the services to the community are really doing the kind of work that we need. And so I think the recommendations have been very helpful, and I think that it will be a very good discussion, but it will be a critical role that we as the elected leadership will play in order to ensure that we do the due diligence that we have in this oversight review. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Sheriff Kincaid.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the coalition and the rest of the groups here for inviting us, first of all, and allowing us the opportunity to participate in this forum. Because this is important that we are able to share what we've done, what we are doing, and hear from you all as to suggestions or recommendations that you can make in terms of helping us do better. We, the Sheriff's Office, is accredited by 4 independent agencies: the American Correctional Association, the Department of Corrections, the National Commission on Correctional Health Care, and the Virginia Law Enforcement Personal Standards Commission. And we're very proud because we work very hard to receive these accreditations. As you've heard before, approximately 40% of the inmates in the Adult Detention Center suffer from some form of mental illness and or co-occurring substance use disorder. Our jail is a place where individuals are brought. They do not receive treatment, rather they receive services. And again, it's not against the law to be mentally ill. So this is part of the tragedy in terms of dealing with individuals, our most vulnerable population, and having them get the treatment they so desperately need. Since I've been elected, since 2013, I've made many changes within the Adult Detention Center through a lot of collaboration and work, not only with my staff, but also with other stakeholders in the community, as well as our public safety partners. To begin with, one of the first changes that I made was I changed the release time for individuals getting out of jail. It used to be standard operating procedures that we release folks at 1 minute after midnight. Now, at 1 minute after midnight, makes really no sense. And when I was asking and going around and trying to figure out why we've done that, because it was a practice that was done for so many years, and as my staff knows, they're saying that, well, because we've always done it that way, that's just not a phrase that works well, and they know that. So ideally, at the end of the day, it was because we would save money on serving breakfast. Breakfast cost me about $1.35. So I offered to pay it out of my own pocket, but what I did end up doing was I changed the release date till 8 o'clock in the morning, where there were more resources available. There was transportation, there was shelters, because again, we have a lot of folks, and I too am on the governing board for the Office to Prevent End Homelessness. We have a lot of our folks that are homeless. So through collaboration with nonprofits, with faith-based organizations, as well as with county and city leaders, this new release time is working out very, very well. In addition, I relocated the Women's Mental Health Unit in our Adult Detention Center to an area that was more therapeutic, had natural light, cells were much larger, and they were closer to our mental health staff. The third, implemented telepsychiatry. So an individual experiencing a mental health crisis would be able to get assistance either through a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a clinical social worker 24/7. Because currently, the staff that I have in the Adult Detention Center, the CSP staff, the Community Services Board, they don't work every single day, 24/7, 365 days a year. However, through collaboration and working with them, we now have staff that work extended hours and also work on the weekends and holidays. I helped spearhead Diversion First, which I'm extremely proud of, and this is through a collaboration through community leaders where I led a group down to Bexar County in San Antonio, Texas, along with members from the police department, the Community Services Board, one of our news channels, and a executive director from the Community Services Board and some of my staff. And there we were able to learn the best practices that they provide in Bexar County. Again, this Diversion First, the whole mission and purpose is to divert those individuals that are nonviolent offenders into treatment as opposed to bringing them to jail. And again, it's not against the law to be mentally ill. I also implemented the 40-hour crisis intervention team training, the state certified course where we're continuing to hold classes. We have another class coming up where we're going to add 10 deputy sheriffs to the 31 that are already trained. You'll hear, sure, throughout this forum that crisis intervention training has been something that's been around for many years. However, it wasn't the state certified mandated training. So we're moving forward with that. In addition to that training, I've added mental health first aid training for all of my staff. I have a few minutes left, and implemented for all of my staff, not just my sworn deputy sheriffs, but my administrative staff, and again, that's extremely important. So our big focus now is on training and making sure that we get the best possible training, but also make sure that we have the services and the resources that we need, which, of course, the Board of Supervisors and the state government gets to hear about continuously. But again, it shouldn't take a tragedy for us to pay attention to our most vulnerable population. And thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Sheriff Kincaid. Now we turn to Chief Police Ed Roessler. Sir.
Thank you, John. The vision statement of the Fairfax County Police Department that I changed once I became chief was to provide ethical leadership through engagement with the community to accomplish three umbrella items. And the key word is engagement. The first item to work with the community is to prevent and fight crime. That's our mission statement. The second item is to improve the culture of safety to preserve the sanctity of all human life in all that we do. And the third is to keep pace with urbanization. And what I'd like to just focus on for a minute is that statement of vision. In the prevent and fight crime, as all of you are aware, Fairfax County, 400 square miles, over 1.2 million residents, and a robust business population, is a safe jurisdiction when you compare us to any other jurisdiction in the United States. And we are that way because of the engaged community. About 2 weeks ago, we had a horrific event in Alexandria where a stranger raped another person in the community. And we responded to that event with no information as far as leads. And it's because of an engaged community, we were able to develop intelligence that led to the arrest of that suspect, and that's making the community safer. Although it's a horrible event, I credit the community with that arrest, and I stood in front of the media to make certain that the community heard that. And that is just one of the latest examples of how we and the community partner to make Fairfax County the safest jurisdiction in the United States. But that engagement includes input. And when I get to the second element, it's that culture, safety, the preservation of the sanctity of human life. One of the first items that I wanted to do as the new chief in 2013 was to bring in a third party to assess the Fairfax County Police Department's use of force policies, training, hiring practices, to make sure that we were benchmarking ourselves, not telling ourselves or producing reports on ourselves out to the community that, oh, we're doing it fine. I wanted a critical look. So therefore, the Police Executive Research Forum was awarded a contract to start looking at the Fairfax County Police Department. And it was my goal from day one to publish that report and share it with the community. Now, over the past 10 years, 2005 through 2015, and you can go to my website and look at the chief's page, there's a decade's worth of officer-involved shootings. There's 37 cases there. And some of those cases led to terminations of officers or discipline. And there's lots that we have done in the past to look at policies, training, and practices to preserve the sanctity of human life. And obviously, we've had events in the community that have resulted in death, whether it was John Geer or Miss McKenna. I know there's a group here that there are things that we could do to prevent or try to prevent unnecessary tragedies in the community. And obviously, Chairman Bova and the Board of Supervisors stood up the ad hoc commission. I welcomed that commission. I value that commission. They have produced 142 recommendations. The Police Executive Research Forum has produced 71 recommendations. And also, as a new chief in 2013, I wanted to get back with national accreditation, the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. There's well over 400 standards that cover from operations to administration in best practices in the United States. So what we have going on right now as your police department is to take community input through the ad hoc commission and many other opportunities for engagement to take a look at our policies and training and say, hey, chief or some of the commanders, you need to change here. This is not what we expect of our police department. And I know we'll get into a whole bunch of issues shortly, but I can pledge to you that it is my goal to keep that ad hoc committee alive through the subcommittee work, through independent investigations, through an auditor, civilian review, use of force training, mental health, and media relations. We are trying to do a better job in those 5 core areas because that's what the community has made through these recommendations. I take them to heart, and I appreciate the input from all of you in this room and those that are not here. It's your police department, I am your chief, and I want to do better, and I want to make sure that we could serve you in a culture of safety that values human life in all we do. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief Roessler. Now down to the lady on the other end, Mary Kimm, the editor and publisher of the Connection newspapers.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's really quite special to be here, and it's a terrific time to have so many people engaged. There's a lot of action that needs to be taken, and the more that you know about it, the more you can help encourage the changes that need to take place. I served on the Police Practices Review Commission, and I served on 3 of the 5 subcommittees. We were formed in March of 2015, and meetings were very intense. We delivered a report in October, 142 recommendations. I'll just spend a minute on each. It was a remarkable process. The commission was made up of people at all levels of law enforcement with a lot of experience with law enforcement. Several members are here, people who had served with the FBI and the DEA and just every level, onto community activists and police officers from Fairfax County. And then at the other end, a lot of, for example, Sal Pelosi Sr. was on the commission, whose son, Sal Pelosi Jr., was shot and killed by the police in 2006. And Sal had brought a lot to the table. There was so much to learn. It was really a remarkable process. The recommendations were greeted with enthusiasm, and now we see some things slowing. I think it's worth noting that the recommendations were very, very supportive of the police. There was a lot of police input, and I think almost every recommendation brings with it a recommendation for resources to the police. I want to remind people really quickly why we're here. The commission was formed in response to the shooting of John Geer. But more than response to the shooting of John Geer, it was formed in response to the amount of time it took to get information about John Geer. It took 520 days, a court order, a lawsuit, a U.S. senator, and tremendous community action for us to just receive the name of the officer who shot John Geer. And it was really that delay, it was the communications problem, more than almost anything, I think, that eroded trust and brought people forward to say we have to do something. And I'm thankful to Sharon Bulaba for forming the commission, and I'm very thankful for the process. I learned so much, and it was really pretty remarkable. Adam Torres, who shot John Geer, remained an employee of the Fairfax County Police Department for almost 2 years after his murder, or his death. We don't know if it was a murder yet. A grand jury didn't meet on the issue until July 2015. Torres was killed in August of 2013. And now he was arrested and is being held without bond since August 2015. I want to say, I don't understand why someone needs to be held without bond after they were 2 years. I know that's a court issue, but after they're 2 years in the same building with everyone, I don't understand how it is that he's a threat at this point, but that's neither here nor there. Torres' trial is scheduled for, give me for a minute here, for April 18th. That's about 6 weeks from now. And when that trial takes place, there's going to be tremendous scrutiny on law enforcement in this area. And that scrutiny is not going to be confined to just Adam Torres and John Geer. It's going to include Natasha McKenna. It's going to include concerns about law enforcement in general. A lot has happened. There have been a lot of positive steps since then. But it's important to know that this is a key time. And we had a meeting, a group of us talked in, I think it was January, about how important it would be to be able to roll out some of the recommendations at the time of the trial. Well, 6 weeks from now, it's going to be hard. I mean, at the time, we talked about the possibility of having the groundwork in place for the police auditor. And, it just would be an important moment to be able to say we've actually made significant steps in oversight. And we'll have to see how we deal with it. Some remarkable work has come out, the diversion first that Sheriff Kincaid talked about. There's a lot of very important changes are underway, but there's a lot to go. In communications, the commission's found that constraints on transparency represent possibly the greatest, and I'm quoting here, greatest risk to sustained public confidence in the Fairfax County Police Department, and that there will be a mutual benefit to both the police and the public with greater openness in communications. There was a lot of communication and a lot of openness during the meeting of the commission, but things were not as open as we'd hoped they would be. There are two things happening now which may help that. 30 seconds. I haven't started on the recommendations. The best practices, the most important thing I think right now that's coming out of this are the recommendations for independent oversight. These recommendations came out of the commission unanimously. An independent auditor's office who would report to the Board of Supervisors and a civilian review panel. The auditor would hear concerns about use of force, about serious incidents, and the citizens review panel would be available for citizens to go to with almost any concerns about abuse of authority. These are critical things, and I hope that you will all contact your members of the Board of Supervisors to encourage them to get these things rolling.
Thank you, Mary.
I have to chastise you all a little bit. I have my carefully laid out questions that I was going to ask you. You have answered half of them. You have mixed up the order in which I was going to do it. You made my job a great deal more difficult, so I'm going to have to switch some of what I was going to do. I do want to start with you, Supervisor Hudgins. I was a little confused about. I'm sorry. This is the period where we're going to. I'm going to ask a few questions. We'll have a little talk here, and then we'll get to the important part of the meeting, which is letting the folks out here ask questions. You talked about a process. It sounded to me like a little bit of bureaucratic speak there. A process of getting to a process to discuss doing something with the recommendations. I'm not quite clear where we are. It's 5 months since the board got them. But let me go to this. Instead of having a question, let me go to this a later question that I decided at the last minute to put in because it's a strong one. I wanted to make sure the ground was firm, and it is. In a very strongly worded editorial last Sunday, the Washington Post criticized Fairfax County supervisors for dragging their feet on policy reforms. That's a quote. On police reforms. That's a quote. In particular, the editorial suggests that the independent civilian oversight recommended by the Commission last October is unlikely to exist. Let me see, I'm going to get my quotes in the right place. Yeah, it is unlikely to exist and exercise actual oversight for some time next year, if then, because, according to the Post, the supervisors, quote, appeared loath to confront police brass, this is this fellow here, and the rank and file representatives of the police, that's 5 police associations who have some union-like characteristics, but unions are illegal in Virginia, so they're not really unions, of course. And these folks remain intent on subverting the oversight panel's independence by stacking it with current and former police officers. Independence, as Mary has just said, and as experts told us at the time on the commission, independence is a vital attribute of such oversight. Does the Post have it right?
I think when I raised the point I raised about this, I don't question the review of the Oversight Committee, but I do question the timing of addressing the issues. And I am not stepping away from support for the police, but what I'm speaking to is the role that the Board of Supervisors should play. I commented that we're spending, I think, 23 days in lines of business review, and we have spent 1 meeting in a public safety committee meeting in which we've been presented this document and the review, and we will be coming back to this. And so I don't get your question. I do feel extremely frustrated by the process. I think it takes the board to, the lesson learned, I think, from where we are is that the silence of the board for multiple years of not coming forward to look at the oversight of the police department as it would with any other agency, I think did not do justice to the police department, did not do justice to the reputation of the Board of Supervisors. And I think that is our responsibility. And I think that the Washington Post question or criticism is legitimate in the standpoint that we have not demonstrated since the review has been completed how we are going to aggressively walk through the recommendations that have been there and make decisions. And I think it's not fair to the department. God forbid that next week there's an incident. What do we rely upon? I agree with your commitment, Colonel Ross, Chief Roessler, but it isn't just your commitment, it's the entire county's commitment, and we are the voice of that county. And that is my viewpoint. And I've expressed that viewpoint. When the chair said, the chair of the police committee, public safety committee indicated we had a lot of work to do, but I think the chief and the deputy county executive sitting there, we have this time, and I think for many of us on the board, we'd like to see a timetable that is expedited, because I think that starts to put us in a framework in which we're not only talking about oversight, we're saying to the community, we're willing to address these issues, and we will address them as timely as possible so that we can start saying to our community, the goodwill you have offered to us is genuine because we are really going to act upon this. And I know that may not be what a solid answer to you, but that is my viewpoint. I don't disagree with, I felt very badly to read that in the Washington Post. But I also had to say, there's only been one meeting of less than 2 hours, and that isn't, to me, the kind of commitment that the board should be making to it.
It's frustrating beyond belief that you all formed the commission in response to a period of, shall we say, lackluster performance on all parts, and I think Sharon Bulova has said this in so many words in point of fact. 18 months, and now there is this sense, and there was this sense on the commission, I must be honest. I was on the commission. People were concerned. We were working hard, and we got good cooperation. Police worked, everybody, there was a good cooperation among the group. Very important viewpoints really came together on a lot of things. But there was always this thing in the back of the room was, we do all this work, we're putting this package together, will it ever see the light of day in the way that we had intended it? Now we're 5 months in, and guess what? The question is starting to surface. And I'm confused by one thing you said, and that is getting to the timetable. What I'm not clear on is that, does that mean that the board has approved the 142 recommendations? It's a matter of having a timetable for implementation, or is it a timetable to start reviewing the recommendations? That's what I'm not clear on.
We have accepted these, and it's a time frame of how we will get through all of the recommendations.
How we will implement.
That's right, implement.
Okay, so they're approved.
No, well, I don't call it, I call it accepted.
Well, wait a minute, but I mean, from the Board of Supervisors, they were submitted to the Board of Supervisors for review and approval. Once you approve them, then there presumably there has to be a plan for implementing them.
Right.
Where are we? Have we got approval of them?
I think it's an approval process we're going through, yes. Yes, there it is.
Can't hear.
I'm sorry.
Need to get her turned on.
Am I turned off?
I don't think they caught your comment because your
Mike wasn't on.
Okay. My answer is yes. The Board of Supervisors has approved the recommendations as presented.
That's the clarification I needed. Thank you. Chief Ross?
From the police department's perspective, when you look at the 142 recommendations, you also need to look at the 71 recommendations from the Police Executive Research Forum, many of which are incorporated into the 142.
One point of clarification. Those all deal with the use of force policies. Is that correct?
Not all of them, but because they delve into the 5 different areas of the subcommittees. Not, the ad hoc is more in depth in certain areas beyond use of force. So when you look at the matrix, there are about 55 items right now that myself and the Deputy County Exec have worked with the Chairman of the Public Safety Committee, Supervisor Cook, to identify as requiring action on behalf of the Board of Supervisors. And what is that action? It's either the creation of staff positions, the allocation of money to grow programs such as Diversion First. Obviously,
so these are the Commission's recommendations, not PERF.
Some of the Commission involves PERF. They're overlapping. And there's personnel law changes that need to possibly be made, and some of the items don't belong specifically to the police department. They might belong to the Community Services Board. So I, as a chief, cannot go down that list and just on my own create the change, because it involves other agencies and matters that only the board can take up. But I can tell you,
that's understood. The board will assign actions as needed.
Right.
And those that go to you, go to you. Those that go to others, go to the others.
Right, but I don't want to leave the impression with the audience here that we're not doing anything. We have changed our hostage barricade policy last June to value the sanctity of life, and I could only give you the latest example of the Franconia station a few days ago responded to a call for service that was a burglary in progress. As the two officers tactically set up upon the house, their efforts were to contain and isolate and evacuate the nearby houses. And our dispatch center, another independent agency that's working with us, and part of these recommendations that we have put in place is to start negotiations. So we're trying to negotiate with the person inside the house. As the officers are setting up on the perimeter at that time, a 19-year-old man comes out of the front door and starts firing a pistol at the officers. They had cover and concealment. He then ran back into the house. We continued negotiations, and then with our new policy, but this is a practice we've always done, but now it's mandated in policy. You have a first-line supervisor who shall respond to the scene. You have a duty officer and a commander that shall respond to the scene, because their role is to take a deep breath and a step back and manage the event so we don't repeat things from the past that unfolded wrong. And then the SWAT team, Crisis Intervention Team trained officers, and professional negotiators from the Community Services Board that are part of our negotiation team respond down to the scene. That happened. We negotiated the surrender of the 19-year-old man. He came out of the front door with, at that time, appeared to be an M16 and the same pistol in his hand. He was given commands from a large distance away, cover and concealment so we don't engage in a firefight. Dropped the long gun, which he did, and then eventually dropped the pistol. He then charged at the officers, and then he was hit with less. We don't know. That's hindsight. He was armed. We don't know. It's dark, and he already shot at us. So then, rather than have a lawful but awful situation, the decision-making process was to use less lethal force. And that was in the beansock round and a 40-millimeter rubber bullet, which then took him to the ground. And then, as the struggle came in, the K-9 team apprehended, we safely handcuffed him, and obviously processed that way. That's a human life saved. That's everyone's life. So when I talk about that vision statement, but those are changes we made, recommendations from both PERF, our own, and the ad hoc, and there's many more. I could spend hours. So the operational components we're moving forward, but there's board action on many of about 55 items.
Understood. So part of it is moving forward, and in critical instances such as this, and I commend you for that. It doesn't sound like an easy one to handle, but we've still got the bulk of the report to go. The other point you made, I think, is understood. The supervisors designate who does it. It's not all on the police department. Mary, were you going to say something there?
I just think that the story that the chief just told is really a remarkable success story. That the teenager was someone who could easily have been shot and killed. It would have been hard not to justify. throughout this process, I'm going to say that Chief Roessler has made it really clear that he wants to run the best police force in the country, and Sheriff Kincaid the same. And the aspiration to be excellent has raised the level. It raises the bar. It raises the bar. It means there's nothing you can ask for that isn't reasonable, but it also raises the level of conversation. And I think this is the kind of hold and contain approach that saves lives in those circumstances. Is an example of how that came forward.
Let me go on and just start with the next
Question for Chief Roessler. This is more getting into it after you were trying to take us there. Both the Ad hoc Commission and the Police Executive Research Forum, PERF, which also studied the police department's use of force. Of the PERF study, they've got lots of recommendations to deal with. And policies and practices recommended the department revise its policies and the training of officers to stress the sanctity of human life, to call for the use of force only when objectively reasonable conditions require it, to use lethal force, less lethal force, when force is necessary, and to employ de-escalation strategies in crisis situations, such as tactics for, quote, slowing a situation down, unquote, rather than dominance to resolve a crisis, which has been the practice in the past. Taken together, these recommendations sound kind of not hard, but in fact, these would change long-standing behaviors and indeed the philosophy and approach to policing within the department. This could be a tall order. I guess my question to you is, what will it take to effect such changes, especially among your veteran officers? You're talking about changing the way they do their business and their approach. It's a dramatic change when you take this all together.
We need to re-engineer the law enforcement profession nationwide. There's over 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States of America that employ over 900,000 sworn law enforcement officers. I'm one chief with one department, and yes, and we're about the 32nd largest department in the United States. So I sit on the Major City Chiefs, which is comprised of the 50 largest departments in the United States, and we meet often. And through the Police Executive Research Forum, for example, with this report, what came out of this were 30 principles, just as you talked about re-engineering to value the sanctity of human life. So earlier I talked about the change in our hostage barricade policy. Our use of force general order for decades already states reasonably necessary, which is a higher level than a U.S. Supreme Court decision in Graham v. Conn, which is part of these principles. It's going above and beyond in holding people accountable.
They added one more word, which is
objectively.
Right. That's in the decision making.
When you sit down and talk about it, there isn't.
Right. So the way I have to, got me on? As the leader of a large organization, my ears. You're right. Change is tough in a law enforcement profession. I need to focus on that master police officer that works midnights at 3 o'clock in the morning, understanding the anxiety that they have of what is this chief doing. And there's only one way to positively affect change, and that's to provide ownership. And that ownership involves the community, the ad hoc commission input, other input from other opportunities that I have for engagement with the community, looking at our policies. Mr. Colosi was invited in to look at the draft of our hostage barricade policy. I took his input and made some changes. That's effective.
This is Salvador Colosi, your son was shot
by our department.
Several years ago.
Yes. So, okay, I can't just roll out a policy and expect obedience. Okay? So, Major Rich Perez in the audience here is my commander of a full-time policy and change team. Full-time. We have that accreditation effort going. We have the PERF recommendations and ad hoc recommendations. So what have we done since then, since June of last year, is during the summer, we socialized all these changes with our first-line supervisors, the sergeants and second lieutenants throughout the department, because day to day they have more influence over the troops than I do, because they all report there. The next was all the commanders. And this past fall, we have our annual in-service training. Rather than come shoot paper targets and clean your gun in handcuffs and go home, We spent all day talking about the sanctity of human life and the changes to come in our decision-making training models based upon the UK model in Scotland, which is in this report and accepted by the Ad Hoc Commission in many of their recommendations. And we set out and put together a team of community members and officers and expert trainers from other jurisdictions to develop a syllabus of training to sustain this. So we brought in a vendor to validate this process, and we are rolling out the training in a few weeks, all the way to the end of May, myself included. We will go through the critical decision-making model that Police Scotland has been using for 4 decades. What is that model? The event I explained in Franconia, that is the model. When you can, you take that deep breath and step back to preserve human life. And also, the version first, I took 5 officers and a commander and gave them to the Community Services Bureau, as did Sheriff Kincaid, provide full-time staff. Together, January 1st, we started the program at Merrifield. So we have a place to take someone so we don't repeat the history of the past. And those are the actions, many of which we have taken so far, which are the most critical.
So the supervisors
Are cogitating that the police are moving ahead on several things. And that's a good thing. I think it is important that people understand the kinds of recommendations we're talking about here really go deeply into the philosophy and practices of police, and it's going to take some time and effort. All the more important to show that the community believes they're urgent and move ahead with them. I think I commend you for the things you are doing. Sheriff Kincaid, the unfortunate death of a mentally ill prisoner, Natasha McKenna, at the county jail last summer sent shockwaves through the community and brought the Black Lives Matter movement into action here in the county. Some very difficult meetings, in point of fact. But her death at the hands of jailers, ill-prepared for the situation of a mentally ill prisoner, highlighted the need for a change in the way law enforcement deals with the mentally ill Fairfax County. You're aware, I'm not saying anything new, and you've begun this path, diversion. You began moving in that direction, but that was a horrific thing, and let me ask you 2 questions, if I could. One, it was quite clear from watching the video of that, and I never want to see something like that ever again. What happened to that woman was beyond humanity. Are you confident that the people, you will still be getting people who come to the jail who are mentally ill, have mental health crises, issues? We're still a ways from weaning them out, if I understand what you described as having been accomplished to date. There are still mentally ill people coming to the jail. Is that correct? Have you begun a process for, if this kind of thing were to occur again at the jail, to transfer a prisoner mentally ill and in a crisis situation? Have you got people trained to handle it so we don't see a recurrence of that particular event?
Yes. You were absolutely right. The Natasha McKenna incident was extremely tragic. And it's something that I think about. It's not something that will ever go away. I think about Natasha McKenna and Miss McKenna all the time. And yes, we do have a policy in place and procedures and practices in terms of not everyone is going to be eligible for diversion. And for those folks that are not eligible for diversion, when they are brought to the jail, we have a team of deputy sheriffs that are all crisis intervention team trained and certified in that, as well as our partners from the Community Services Board, the mental health staff, our medical staff, that we are able to get emergency custody orders, emergency ECOs, emergency custody orders, or we're able to transfer them down to a mental health facility if they are in crisis, because the last thing that we want is to have anyone brought to our jail that's going to decompensate, and that's something that will not happen again. I am advised by my commanders of any situation that possibly could turn into that, but we have made it a priority to get folks the help that they need. Again, this is something that's going to continue to take time. There's, always issues with resources, with bed space, but I can tell you that it's a priority for us. And when we do transport any of the individuals that are experiencing mental health crisis, they're always transported by folks that are certified in crisis intervention team training. But again, we have some obstacles and challenges.
Natasha, McKenna?
They're still at work. So, yes, we have procedures and policies in place to address those individuals that are going to, that are not eligible for conversion prior to coming into the jail.
Your statement, again, underlines the urgency of this for the supervisor to provide you the wherewithal to get that in place.
Well, this is something, it's not just the Board of Supervisors. This is something that is the community. It's something that's collaboration. It's something that it's not just the Board of Supervisors making decisions. It is the community, the citizens, folks that have have and do currently suffer from mental illness, advocacy groups, the police department, the mental health nonprofits, the faith-based community. So this is not something that's going to be accomplished by just a few people sitting at a table. Everyone has to have a seat at the table. We need to have input because, again, it's the awareness piece. And as I mentioned previously, it should not take a tragedy for people to pay attention. Mental illness previously has really not been a priority unless people know someone that's mentally ill or have experienced, run into somebody. It's something that, unfortunately, has been taboo to talk about. And this is something that's important we do talk about because, again, the jails were not designed to be mental health facilities or psychiatric hospitals. That wasn't the purpose intended. However, by default, that's unfortunately what we have become.
Next, you may know something about this.
I want to bring back these numbers that we've been looking at in January because I want people to recognize that we are moving forward. But I also want to say that if we are not vigilant to the issue, we will be back to where we were. And I will use the example of when CIT was in the crisis intervention training and delivery system was introduced to the board more than 5 years ago. We said we would do it. And we went through reductions in costs in services, and we didn't monitor that. And I give the police department the credit for using their method for trying to implement that. But we went to Montgomery, Pennsylvania to look at their system. We looked at how the police no longer transports people in Pennsylvania, but the fire department does. We examined the legislative rights to have handcuffing or not handcuffing. We did do work on this. It isn't that 5, 6 years ago we were just looking and not paying any attention to mental health. But I will say, what you said, Stacey, it is important that the community and everyone stay engaged in the issue. Because I will tell you, it becomes a measure of priority setting and remaining committed to those priorities until either there is not an issue or to the level of the issue we will continue to support it. And that is one of the challenges we face. That's my reason, Chief, I said that when we had I've erred because I missed one. I think you had an earlier public safety committee to introduce this, and then we came back just last month. But I would have rather 23 meetings on this than on the lines of business of the county, because I will tell you, I can figure that one out. It's been around, and for new people, they can do that. But this is important, and this is life-saving. And it is also, I think, assuring to our public the reputation of Fairfax County is what we say it is. And we are going to say it and demonstrate it. And if you can't demonstrate it, it fails it. It fails all of the officers and all of the community service board people who are working to not do the vigilance piece that's needed. And that is my major concern.
I hear both you and Sheriff Kincaid also putting a challenge out there to our audience today. Be vigilant about this. Keep your eye on this ball because it's still got a long way to go. And the process is such that the supervisor is under a lot of pressures from a lot of sources about a lot of things. And if you're not careful, your item might get pushed off the table unless you're following. And let me go to one last question here from the moderator, then we're going to get to the important part, questions to you all. This is a question I want to direct to Mary Kimm. As the editor and publisher of community newspapers, you have been a leader in efforts to improve government transparency and accountability. And I've seen you write about this many times. In the aftermath of the Geer killing by Fairfax County police officer, Fairfax County supervisors and the police department under them provided a stark example of a failure on both counts. That is transparency and accountability. In reporting to the community, how was your goal of informing the public about the Geer case, to do your job, to get the information out to them? How were you affected by the lack of transparency on the part of the county board supervisor and the police department? That must have frustrated you something awful. How does that affect you?
Well, as frustrating as it was for anybody in the press trying to report on it, consider the family who couldn't get any information during that period of time. So yes, it's very frustrating when you know it's your job as a member of the press to inform the public and to bring this information public even when there's resistance. And there's resistance to releasing all kinds of information. So it was a big problem. I mean, there was a policy not to release the officer's name, but also we heard over and over again that he was shot, Geer was shot when he moved his hands, and that there were guns present, and there were guns present in the home, but I believe 30% of Fairfax County homeowners own guns, and I'm hoping that they're not all at risk if there's a 911 call from their house. But, so it was there was no information for 16 months, and it was very frustrating. And when the information did come out, it was confounding. And again, I say my heart goes out to the family, but it was their lawsuit actually that forced the release of the information and the changes.
Okay, now we'd like to turn to you, the audience, to ask questions to the panelists. If you would do me a favor, if you would raise your hand, and if you would keep your question, introduce it, but state it. We're trying to avoid speeches, but get to your question, and tell us who you want to answer the question. Lady there, I believe you had your hand up first.
Thank you. Oh, good, that microphone. This question is for Sheriff Stacey Kincaid. I have a mentally ill son, so I was very distraught when I saw the television process with Mrs. McKenna and how she was handled in the jail that resulted in her death. I now know that you went to San Antonio to find out how they dealt with their mentally ill people there. So, as an interested parent who has gone through multiple mental health agencies, and my son is now in California, I would like to know your process step by step. If you get a mentally ill person that's eligible for your diversion program, I would like you to talk to the audience and tell them step by step how it would work. And I understand that your people no longer have tasers, or no, they are no longer going to use tasers. Is that correct?
Tasers are not used.
So say a mentally ill person comes in, would you please tell us step by step how your diversion program will work?
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate that question. Diversion first. This is the part where sometimes we seem to get a little bit confused with what the mission is, because ideally what we're working on is to have a jail diversion program where someone is in jail and that we're able to do exactly what's done and as quickly that has been done with the Merrifield Crisis Response Center. So the current practice right now, and again, this is public safety, is that when an individual comes in contact with justice, the police department, nonviolent offense, low-risk offender, whatever you want want to call it, the officer has the discretion to divert that person by taking them to the Merrifield Crisis Response Center to divert them into getting treatment as opposed to bringing them to jail.
So that they never end up.
So that's the goal, so they never end up in the jail. When an individual is not accepted or is not eligible, it's not, again, not everyone is going to be eligible for the diversion program. There's going to be other instances where they're not. But when they are brought to the jail, our process is not as quick, but we're trying to streamline the process. Because unless someone is brought to the jail in a, experiencing a very severe mental health crisis, then they are brought in, they're evaluated, they are placed in a housing location, in a mental health unit, and they are evaluated by the mental health staff, they're evaluated by our medical staff, and again, the immediate goal is to get them stabilized. Once they're stabilized, then we're trying to get them from point A to point B, and that means that they're housed currently in the mental health unit, and then we try to move them into general population. So again, the whole jail diversion program, a true jail diversion program, when someone is brought into the jail and we're able to divert them through the use of a mental health docket, through the use of the magistrates, through the use of having the resources necessary on the outside, that's when a jail diversion program is going to work. And right now, once an individual is arrested and brought into the jail, I have no place to divert them. So I'm not sure if that's answering the question. I mean, the process currently is, as I explained, that the individual is brought to Merrifield, and then they're able to be diverted to a treatment facility.
Is that responsive to your question?
Well, she answered my question, but what happened to Ms. McKenna then? How did that happen?
I think we need to move on to that.
No, that's the question that all of us want to know the answer to.
We need to know how that happened and if that's what happened to another person, John.
Well, I can tell you that the Commonwealth Attorney in his report outlined prior to even when Ms. McKenna was brought into the Adult Detention Center in Fairfax, outlined from the very beginning until the end. There were many missed opportunities where she possibly could have been diverted. That never happened.
Why?
Because there was no, at that time, diversion program, or there was, again, you're talking about officers that are coming in contact with individuals that are in need of mental health treatment, and at that point, I can't answer why all the other jurisdictions, I can't answer why, Alexandria Hospital, I don't have the answers as to why she was not diverted. I mean, again, as I mentioned, some people are not eligible for diversion.
But do you know why they tased her so much with the bag over her head? That's something that you can answer to. Because obviously there are policies on the books that allow that to happen because your officers are still on the payroll. So whatever policies are on the books right now, that's what you can answer to, because obviously something is in that policy that absolved them of her murder. What are those policies?
The Commonwealth Attorney, in his 51-page document, outlined everything regarding Ms. McKenna. There was nothing in there that, there was no criminal wrongdoing found through the investigation.
Really?
Well, I'm telling you, I didn't do the investigation, the Fairfax Police Department did the investigation, and then all of that was turned over to the Commonwealth Attorney. We do not investigate ourselves.
Yes, you did.
Sorry, let's move on to the next question.
You're not answering.
Lady over here, please. Go ahead.
Hello, my name's Laurie Dodd. This question is for Supervisor Hudgins. I heard you express frustration that when the 142 recommendation report came down in October from the Review of Police Practices Commission, that the Board of Supervisors has not devoted enough time to that report, if I heard you correctly. I think most of us in this room would agree with that frustration. My question is, what barriers are there to full consideration of that report? What can we as citizens do to help overcome those barriers? So move forward and implement those recommendations.
Thank you for your question. At our last meeting on the public safety, there are timetables on here. My challenge is, there is, I guess, more research needs to be done on some of them. But I will go back to what the chief said. I think that for us to do our full due diligence, we need a full report of the status of where the police department is with implementing each of their steps. I would tender that if the incident that happened the other day had not occurred as a positive outcome, I don't think we would have recognized how much you have put in place. And I think that's unfortunate because it's not giving you credit for the work that you're doing. And so I think it's an urgency that we all just have to put our heads to. I will say, some will say we have many commitments. We're doing lines of business, which is a due diligence to the community. We're doing budget, and we're doing all of these things in the next 8 weeks. I would hope that we are not, and I said that because we had deferred that public safety initiative committee meetings in the prior experiences, we lost track of it. If you don't calendar it, you don't do it. That's a given. And so that's the urgency I have about the issue, and making sure that we schedule the meetings so that we get a status and understand. We will know some of the budget information that's needed because we're going to do the budget right away. But I want to be able to say to you all of the policy changes that have been implemented or have not, and why not, and when do we get there? Because that's important. Maybe we don't need all of them right away, but we really do need to have a calendaring of this that says, you're going to do a public safety meeting every other month or every month or whenever, because otherwise it goes off the calendar. And that was what happened when we were discussing whether or not we would have the review or the audit oversight piece. The last meeting said we'll come back and get a report, and guess what? We didn't have a meeting for a long time.
But that's a management issue.
With the Board of Supervisors.
I agree.
That's right there. Chief Roessler wants to speak briefly to this point.
The county executive proposed the budget to the Board of Supervisors. Within that budget, he's allocated $7.5 million for the ad hoc recommendations. And that $7.5 million, from my perspective, is to help the board accomplish as quickly as possible many of those 55 items that require board action, whether it's establishing positions, adding to the Diversion First program, getting law changes, personnel regulation changes, because a chief cannot do that. So I believe the commitment is fully there, that $7.5 million to quickly get some action, hopefully, to make some changes that a chief can't make, but the board can direct.
It's a little hard to relate to
The 55, not quite being sure what they are, and I wonder if that leaves out independent oversight and review, for example. Is that included, or is that somewhere else?
That is included, and as I stated earlier, I welcome that. It's just a matter of getting the funding, the structure, some personnel regulation changes, and the board to approve it. And I will help, and I continue to help drive that.
those recommendations.
For the oversight are, excuse me, but nickel and dime, they're small amounts of money. You're talking something that's maybe $250,000 for everything in there.
No, if you look at the entire
No,
package,
independent oversight.
well, just that alone, you're correct, and that's what part of that $7.5 million is, to accomplish that mission.
Great.
Okay, I had a lady I pointed to before, and they gave me the wrong person. Your hand is up first. Lady here in the white.
Yes, I'd like to first of all thank the sheriff and the chief of police for their efforts with Diversion First. I was, involved and knew about that. Just for your information, in July of last year, there was a Stepping Up initiative for counties to try and get mentally ill people out of our prisons. And our county supervisors, thank you, stepped up and took that challenge and made a huge effort called Diversion First to divert people from jail. This is only the first step in a series of intercepts where people can get from, instead of going to jail, be offered treatment. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. This is where people are going to be taken by the police officer to Merrifield if they have a minor offense. But there still needs to be diversion from the jail. There still needs to be diversion in the court system. And those pieces of it haven't been in place yet. And it's going to take some time to get those and funding to get those other pieces in place. But I think it's amazing that in 6 months we were able to get this program up and running in our county, and it's a great credit to all of the people who were involved. There's still a lot to be done, and my question is about isolation in the jail. Could you talk about why individuals with mental illness are still segregated, that Vera Institutes produce reports that they shouldn't be, that this is not a good policy? What is being done, what can be done to prevent people from being segregated who have mental illness?
Certainly. We are no longer segregating and having people in isolation, in single cells. In other words, they're moved to a housing area where there are other individuals. So, and I'm familiar with that report, and isolation does more harm than good, and we are very focused on ensuring that, and again, when we have folks come in that are experiencing a mental health crisis or a behavioral issue, and they have to be placed in a cell by themselves, that happens maybe an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, but that is not a place where they are going to remain, and we understand that. We are working towards making sure that there's no area that's strictly segregation, and if there is an area that is considered to be segregated, that there are programs and services available to alleviate that individual being in that particular cell by themselves, no contact with anyone. So we are working very hard towards that.
You've taken two from over here. How about a question way back, gentlemen, in the way back there? I'm sorry, that's a lady, I'm sorry. Way back there.
That's okay. I have two questions. The first is there any review for reports such as Ray Moreau's report? Because I feel like there's many people in the community who feel a lack of resolution because there hasn't been any disciplinary action against the 6 sheriff's deputies that were involved in the death of Natasha McKenna. And I read the report, and I personally found many inaccuracies, including the first page. Her weight was even listed incorrectly as 180 pounds versus she was a very petite woman. And I think this is what's, in my opinion, seems, if you start out with inaccuracies just on that level, we really need to have more review in terms of what that report is. Will there be justice for the deputies that were involved? Because another thing that I found in the report that was upsetting was, initially it said they needed to be wearing hazmat suits to confront her, but later, after they couldn't get her vital signs and they had to call EMS, the EMS, when seeing everybody dressed in hazmat suits, said, is there some sort of risk here that I need to be aware of, as a healthcare professional would, seeing people in hazmat suits? And they were said, no risk. And that was a quote in the report. So what we're seeing here is, why were they wearing these suits? I have a family member with mental illness. This whole thing is horrific, and we all need more resolution, and if that means reviewing this report, and so my questions are, will there be review of the report, and will there be disciplinary actions towards these deputies?
Let me start out by saying, in terms of inaccuracies, there was inaccuracies from the very beginning, and unfortunately, what we've learned is that perhaps we have to do a better job with the media. I can tell you though, there were a lot of the inaccuracies came from the media. And if you just referring to the weight, which again, that came from the medical examiner's report, okay, not from what was put in on her booking card. Nevertheless, we have just, actually my command staff, we are reviewing the Internal Affairs Administrative Investigation, and I can tell you that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of documents. As far as the staff involved with this, from the beginning they were removed from the emergency response team. They have not, and they are still not on the emergency response team. Okay. Okay. And we are still reviewing the investigation, not only with the deputy sheriffs, but also with the medical staff, also with the community services board, the mental health staff. So the 8,000 pages of documents that have been through the police department, to the Commonwealth Attorney, and now to our internal affairs investigation, we are still going through that. And again, trying to implement and make changes along the way without jumping to conclusions. So we are doing what we need to do.
How is it not against policy to tase a shackled, naked woman? How is that not against your personnel policy?
Keep on an orderly fashion. Let me see if I understand.
The process is not complete. Is it reasonable to ask when this process might complete, so we can answer the question, is there some kind of action to be taken about, with regard to the individuals? The fact that we're still studying it, it's 8 months ever later.
From the time we've received the investigation, which was back in September, and our internal affairs, again, I've got 2 internal affairs investigators. So it's taken some time. But as far as discussing, personnel matters, that's not something that I'm here to discuss. I can tell you that I guess the expectation with some is that the only thing that's going to make this any better is that we fire the deputies.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yes. 6 months from now, 3 months from now, is there likely to be a final report, so that there's some kind of closure on this show? That's what I'm asking.
Internal closure, by the mid-April, we have a meeting. We actually have meetings every Wednesday, but yes.
The expectation is that while you're reading and everybody's reading, if one more person dies in this jail, blood is on your hands. The expectation is that it's time to implement and change things today.
The process has changed, and the process has changed for the better. And we've learned a lot, and we're implementing the best practices that we need in order to move forward. And again, we're doing the best that we can.
How do you not know that's not the
frustration is legitimate, and it's heard, it's understood, and I'm by no means trying to silence you, because I think the only way we're going to get some resolution to these things is we keep raising these questions. I don't disagree with that, but we have to move on in this session now. Gentleman in the back, is I got that a gentleman or a lady? I cannot see you back there. Is the problem? Is that a lady? Way in the far back.
Didn't get an opportunity. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being accessible to us. I would like to know, I'm from Adams Center community, I would like to know, to just divert a little bit about the discussion, and it's another also very important aspect that I'd like to know, especially from the Chief of Police. In the light of the recent hatred on TV and the lot of Islamophobia, we, the Islamic community, have been faced lately a lot of hatred, bullying in the school, children, and we are being looked in a very hateful way. You are our, law enforcement, and we expect our safety is what do you have place in this, in the light of unfortunate, a lot of Islamophobia on TV, on people trying to be president of this country, great country we are citizen of, that excluding, what do you put in place for us to be safe in this country we call home?
The Fairfax County Police Department for several decades has had a policy on bias/hate crimes, and we investigate all of those. They are crimes. Some are determined to be perceptions, but we will prosecute fully all hate and bias crimes in this county, regardless of who you are. And as far as the Muslim community is concerned, myself, Captain Manzo from the Reston District Station, we have been for many decades associated with the Muslim community, whether it's in Falls Church, the Adams Center, or other parts of the county. I have members on my diversity council that advise me, but I can assure you that we have networked through our school resource officers in both the middle schools and the high schools, and through many different faith-based organizations to understand that please call the police when hate is directed toward you. Let us investigate it and work with you and help. If there's prosecution to be made, we will help with that. We will not tolerate any type of hate in Fairfax County.
Unless the hate comes from police
First
officers.
point, for the lady who asked the question, who is the first point of contact in the event that someone fears this kind of attack or feels threatened in some way?
If it's not an active event, please call our non-emergency number, which is 703-691-3131. Or if you have the direct connect to your district station, you need to get an officer there to take the report. And the bias crime coordinator is a captain that reports directly to me. Captain Manzo was that previous commander, now assigned to the Reston District Station. But we need to get a police report. We gather intelligence, and if there's any type of pattern out there and there are suspects, we want to bring them to justice.
Yanni?
Lady right here, lady right here. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, finish that.
703-691-3131. 2131, I'm sorry. 2131.
Have we got the right number here?
2131.
Okay, I wanted to say, first of all, this is actually on? Okay. I think one of the reasons or ways we can stop sending mentally ill people and other people to jail is to stop arresting people for things that shouldn't be crimes to begin with, like criminalizing homelessness. But I had two questions, one for Sheriff Kincaid, and that is, have you updated your actual policy on using tasers, or are you just not using them right now? And then for Chief Roessler, what is your stand on having ex-cops and ex-Fairfax County employees on the Citizen Review Board if it ever actually is instituted?
So, thank you for that question. We are updating all of our policies regarding the taser, which is now the electronic control weapon. It's not going to be utilized in the jail with the exception of an exigent circumstance. For example, if there's a hostage situation or if there is a riot, it's not going to be used on any individual in the jail for any other reason.
It's documented in policy, or is that?
It's being put into policy.
Being put in.
As far as the Citizen Review Board, how it's comprised, that obviously is a decision for the board, obviously, to get the program up and running and to make a decision how it's going to be staffed. That should not be my decision. I should not have any undue influence or bias injected into that process.
What are your personal feelings?
My personal and professional feelings, it needs to be unbiased, and if the board thinks that no ex-Fairfax County police officers should be on that to prevent any perception from any of you in the community that it's loaded up and it's going to have a predetermined outcome, I don't want that. So if that means that we should have no police personnel on it, and that's a decision that's made, I'll support it. But understand, we need some guidance to the review panel to understand police policies and procedures. So if that's something that could be tasked with training, if we look at the Civil Service Commission of Fairfax County, those are citizens. They are trained well. County Executive Griffin and the Board of Supervisors years ago reformatted the Civil Service Commission to avoid any front-loading of employee group bias and favoritism of the outcome of a grievance. I think that's where we need to steer this, and if there's no police on it, then so be it. But we need to inject some type of educational format of police policies and practices so correct decisions can be made.
Let me just, if I might comment on that. I was on the subcommittee. I think the recommendations call for there be no current or former police from Fairfax County, but it does provide for one person.
One person has to have law.
One person with law enforcement.
Law enforcement experience. I think we changed, or probably changed for Fairfax County employee, not for Fairfax County police. Right. I think that was certainly
not. Right.
You know, city employee, a civilian employee, not a patrol officer. That person. I think one person needed to be.
He needs a mic here.
Here. The recommendations for 7 members of the public, 7 members. I believe it said one of which, or at least one of which, needed to have prior law enforcement experience, but not deal with something that not be Fairfax County experience. And I think actually said no. I think it states now no Fairfax County ex-Fairfax County employee, but I think we sort of come to an agreement that if the board sees fit to appoint an ex-civilian Fairfax County employee, so be it, it has the best person.
The other part of it, I think the chief raises a legitimate point on this, is that this body, of course, must understand how the police work. The assumption there and the discussion on the subcommittee, I'm very clear on this, is that there would be a relationship, and of course, there would be an ability to consult with you, consult with your staff in terms of, okay, what is the policy practice on this? So we think we got the in-house experts to deal with this.
To the extent of these things that's happened, the idea is that the members would be trained by maybe an outside professional or someone about the various things, or by Nicole, the National Association, the things that they need to know in order to perform effectively that civilian role. Because as a practical matter, the auditor is going to bring the law enforcement experience and expertise to the situations as well. So there's both sides are covered.
Let's see. They tell me that our time is running short, so we're going to do we're going to do two more questions. Lady here in the front.
Hello, this question is for Sheriff Kincaid specifically. Building on what the lady in the white sweater said some time ago, it's really amazing everything that's been accomplished just in the last several months as far as getting Diversion First set up and off the ground. And I was wondering if you could please describe your policy initiatives over the next few years just to kind of build on the success of what's already been accomplished.
Well, we certainly have a lot of initiatives, but again, some of these certainly require having the resources and funding, and I have made it a priority to go not only with the Board of Supervisors, but also with state government in letting them know that we don't need more jails built. We need more mental health treatment facilities built. And also, in addition to, and I believe someone brought it up regarding these crimes, these nuisance crimes, or these nonviolent offenses, that we are able to recognize as a society when people do in fact need treatment and not just continue to bring them into the jail. But as far as my initiatives, and speaking of the lady in the white, that's Joanna Walker from NAMI. Thank you for being here, Joanna. I had no idea you were. One of the initiatives that we just met a couple weeks ago was to implement a support group for families that have adult children locked up in the adult detention center that are and suffer from mental illness and or co-occurring substance use disorder. So again, this is our way of reaching out to the community, hearing what the community has to say, but oftentimes because of medical information, mental health information, HIPAA, They are often not, meaning the families and loved ones are not able to get the information that they really do need, and to try and work and to ensure that if someone has a loved one that does get locked up and they're not able to get answers as they were in the past, at least we can say, you know, we're going to go check, we're going to let you know what's going on. So we're going to have our first support group meeting, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But ideally, I mean, I've got lots of things that I want to do. Again, it's going to require change in the culture, but also ensuring that, you know, again, I'm not going to be able to fix this systemic problem of mental illness by myself. And that's why it's so important, as with Diversion First, that everyone, again, has a seat at the table, because frankly, that's the only way that it's going to work.
Okay, last question, sir.
So I just want to state there are a couple of pieces that were interesting as far as the removal of tasers, and I appreciate the language less lethal, because less lethal is also just lethal. But fundamentally, and I know I speak for myself and a lot of other people, this form in and of itself can be infuriating to the point of blood rising, because it has an almost exclusive focus on training. And I'm an educator and I love training. I think it's important, anti-bias training and all of that. But I'm thinking if a civilian were to kill another civilian, okay? And if my mentally ill sister were killed, and then I came to a forum and I said, what are we gonna do about this? And then I went to that forum and you said, well, here's what we're gonna do. You know, we're gonna, the perpetrator who killed your sister, we're gonna send them to a sanctity of life training, okay? First we're gonna do that. And not only that, but then we're gonna send them to an anti-bias training. And then not only that, we're gonna send them to a how to deal with mentally ill people training. And not only that, we have 142 recommendations on state-of-the-art workshops that they're going to go through. And this is going to be our response to the person who killed your sister. And I don't think even the quiet people in this room, that would be enough for anyone. And fundamentally, the problem is Natasha McKenna is not being treated as a human being. If you watch the video, if you actually, I don't know how many people watch the video, but if you actually just watch the video, your credentials are your own eyeballs. And if you watch the video, what you'll find is you don't need any more training to not tase a shackled woman when she's naked in a chair. You don't need any. Well, I'm not done. I got I'm sorry to upset you, sir, but she's dead. She's dead. You'll be all right. You'll be all right. So I'm getting to my question. Out of your 142 recommendations and training, what will you do specifically around accountability for those officers? And if those officers were taking instruction, as it appears in the video, what will be done about departmental accountability? That's the question. Not training.
Thank you, Judge.
Who do you want to answer the question?
Both of y'all.
Directing this to the sheriff, I see.
Both.
Okay. Well, I can tell you, if you go to my website and you see an officer-involved shooting webpage, 37 cases, I've made transparent what we have done as a department, and I've been chief since the summer of 2013, and you can see the accountability piece that I have in there, that an officer was terminated for an unreasonably necessary use of force, and I'm making that, I've made that public. I did a press conference on that case. That's what I could offer as proof to you. I agree with you. We can't just throw training. We need accountability. And if someone does wrong and takes a human life, I can no longer employ them.
Thank you. Your agreement isn't communicated in the report. That's the issue.
Which report? That's not my report, sir.
So Stacey, go ahead and answer that next.
Sure.
Let me just say that on that particular day, there was not any intention to harm Ms. McKenna.
Oh, it doesn't matter, you killed her.
Intention versus
Torture.
impact.
Okay.
Intention versus impact, two different
Okay,
things.
so let me tell you what it is that we're doing, and I understand that there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of people that are extremely upset. But again, this was an incident that the sheriff's office, we do not do investigations on ourselves when it comes to criminal activity. That was done by the Fairfax County Police Department. The decision as to whether or not to bring charges or to say that these deputies maliciously had, you know, the intent to go out and to kill somebody.
They still
That was
tortured
not-
and killed her.
That's
That's not the question.
Well, what do you think? If the report is saying that they didn't do anything, what do you think? You're shifting blame.
I'm not shifting the blame to anyone. We're sitting here.
She's stating a fact. That's who did the
Stating
investigation.
a fact that I'm not the one who did the report. I'm not the one who made the decision that the deputies involved didn't commit a crime. I am not the one who did that.
But did they not violate your policy?
So this is where, as I mentioned, in terms of an internal affairs investigation, we determine now whether policies were violated, whether procedures were violated. That's what we're doing right now.
If I
Can I just clarify that? So that this internal affairs means that they're looking into it in terms of administrative and personnel actions.
We know
No
what that
criminal
means.
matter. Okay,
We
you
know.
know. Okay.
That's condescending.
If I can, if you, again, I'll point to my website for the officer-involved shooting cases. You will see a few cases in there. There's a column as far as what happened legally, prosecution, and then there's a column for the administrative outcomes, and you will see several cases where the law, you know, cited that there was no criminal violation. However, our administrative investigation in a few of the cases found that the officer violated the policy, the reasonably necessary, and they've been fired and or disciplined because there's different levels. So hopefully, you know, there's two different processes here. The administrative process, you have to, you know, understand that the employees are compelled to answer those questions as a condition of work, and it's very powerful. So the criminal investigation goes first because you have to have a firewall, because if you compel and it's using criminal, it's going to be thrown out of the criminal court.
Right.
So clearly, from the police department perspective, and I know in law enforcement in general, and the sheriff's agency, police officers' Bill of Rights and other personnel laws, that's the process we follow. So what I'm trying to say to all of you is, and especially Ms. Kimm, who pointed out earlier about the need for transparency, that's what that website represents, going back into the past, things that were not transparent. You could also see back in 05 and 06, 07, the media releases, one sentence, some, none, and that was acceptable to the community back then. That's not acceptable today. And if you have seen our footprint on social media grow, and the press conferences I have done within the past 2 weeks on cases, I need to stand there and tell you, the community, exactly what's happened. And we've learned from the past, and I'm listening to you, and I'm trying to improve. So I appreciate your input and pushing me.
We need her to do that.
For transparency, you should list the names of the officers and
That's going to
victims.
conclude the session for this afternoon. A lot of what's coming out here is frustration. It's not going to go away until we get some more of these things, some more clarity, but some more of these issues resolved, and see real changes over time. And don't let go of your frustration. They need
Oh, it ain't going away.
Don't let go of it.
Thank you.
Okay, we can do that. And the overall time, as a matter of fact, would have been better if we had more time.
No, you talk less. If they talk less. More.
She's not an incident, she's a person. Say her name.
All right, and thank you all, and we appreciate those comments as well as your participation. First, I wanted to say thank you to Chief Roessler and Sheriff Kincaid and Supervisor Hudgins and Publisher Kimm for spending this time with us, for being available, for taking these questions, not easy questions and not easy answers. And I want to thank John for moderating. Excellent job, thank you. Thanks for the folks from the Sheriff's Department and Police Department for coming. Appreciate having you here. Appreciate all of you and your passion that you bring to this. I don't think I have to encourage some of you to keep it up, but for the rest of you, we hope you'll get involved. If you want to process this a little more, we will Luisa's standing back there with her arm up. She will, any of those three, will form some small discussion groups in the corners if you want to stay and discuss a little more. Also, you have this form to give us feedback on how we've done and what we can do better and how you want to be involved. And there are the tables outside from several organizations that give you some options on getting involved. Finally, we have some refreshments in the back, and we hope that you've gotten something out of this and that you will continue to hold these issues and to take action on them. Thank you all for coming.